The suit fit me perfectly, thanks to old Taylor Finch, who had been serving me since I was a young teacher, who had just gotten a job at the Beaverton Bay Research Center. Saturday, June 7th. I looked at my reflection in the mirror and tried to smile. Wrinkles gathered around my eyes like cracked clay at the bottom of a dried-up pond. 72 years old, and I can still stand up straight. Military training and years of diving in the sea taught me to keep my back straight. They taught me to look danger straight in the eye, even danger like this. I took the envelope I had received 2 weeks ago out of my breast pocket. The doctor's report: aggressive pancreatic cancer, 6 months, maybe 8 if I'm lucky. Strangely, I felt neither fear nor despair, only a quiet, almost peaceful sadness, as if I were sitting on the shore watching the sun set on the last day of my vacation. I carefully folded the paper and put it back in the envelope. No one should know, at least not today, not at Cody's wedding. Cody, my grandson, the only person in this family who truly inherited my passion for the sea and its mysteries. I remember the first time I took him to the research station. He was about 8, a little boy with a mop of red hair and a sprinkling of freckles on his nose. He wouldn't leave the microscopes, examining the plankton samples we had collected that morning. "Grandpa Winnie, it's a whole world," he exclaimed without looking up from the eyepiece. "They're so tiny but so complex, like a clock, only alive." At that moment, I saw myself in him, the same thirst for knowledge, the same admiration for the complexity of the world. Unlike my son Russell, who always thought my profession as a marine biologist was boring and unpromising, the sound of an incoming message brought me back to the present. The phone was on the bedside table. "Grandpa, are you ready? Mom is asking if she needs to pick you up." V is Verity. Even in her messages, she signed with a single letter, as if her full name required too much effort. Verity Prescott, soon to be Verity Hampter, daughter of Alfred Prescott, owner of the pharmaceutical company Prescott Medical. Beautiful, educated, flawless in everything from the tips of her manicured nails to her perfectly styled blonde hair, and completely cold, like the deep-sea currents I had studied for most of my life. "I'm on my way. I'll get there myself, thank you," I replied, trying to be polite. After all, in a few hours, she would become part of our family. Family. I smiled bitterly at the word. After my Elizabeth died 7 years ago, the concept had become rather vague to me. Russell and his wife Paige never made any secret of the fact that they considered me a burden. "Dad, you need to move into a retirement community. They'll take care of you there." I had heard this phrase from my son countless times. Only the money from my patent for a method of detecting toxins in marine organisms, which I had used to pay for their mortgage and Cody's education, kept them from taking more decisive action. I closed the door of my house on the shore of Lake Beaverton and slowly walked to my car. It was a clear morning, and the sun had already risen above the water, turning it into a shimmering mirror. I loved this place. Elizabeth and I had spent the best years of our lives here, and we had dreamed of growing old together here. At the wheel of my old Volvo, I remembered the day Cody announced his engagement. He came to my house unannounced, beaming with happiness. "Grandpa, I did it. I proposed, and she said yes." I hugged him, feeling proud and slightly anxious at the same time. Cody met Verity in graduate school, where they were both studying marine biochemistry. "Love at first sight," he said. But there was something about this girl that made me wary. Maybe it was the way she looked at my modest home when she came over for dinner with Cody, or how she interrupted me when I started talking about my research, clearly finding it boring and irrelevant. "Are you sure she's the person you want to spend the rest of your life with?" I asked then, trying to sound neutral. "Absolutely, Grandpa," Cody exclaimed. "She's smart, ambitious, and we share the same scientific interests. Plus, her father can help us finance our project to study the pharmaceutical potential of deep-sea organisms." So that's it. Pharmaceutical potential. Money. Always money. I parked near St. James Church in downtown Beaverton. The red brick building was decorated with white ribbons and floral arrangements. The guests were already gathering, many of them unfamiliar to me. Mostly Verity's friends and colleagues, I assumed. Among them stood out Alfred Prescott, tall with impeccable posture and a steely gaze that seemed to freeze the air. Next to him was his wife Celeste, a painfully thin woman with a forced smile and eyes that never smiled along with her lips. Winnold, finally. My sister-in-law Paige's voice sounded too loud and falsely cheerful. She quickly approached me, adjusting her hairstyle, which was too young for her. We were starting to worry. Cody was asking about you. I'm right on time, Paige, I replied calmly, glancing at my watch. There was still an hour before the ceremony began. Yes, of course, but you know how important it is to take family photos before the ceremony starts. The photographer is already here. Everyone is waiting for you. Her hand, my passion for science, for the sake of knowledge, not profit, had always been an incomprehensible whim to him. Dad, he nodded to me, ending his conversation. You look good. Is that a new suit? No, I just haven't worn it in a while, I replied. I bought this suit for Elizabeth's funeral. Russell should have remembered that, but he was always selectively forgetful. Verity entered the room, radiant in her wedding dress. Although let's not forget the role of family support. My father always says that behind every successful man is a strong family, or an influential father-in-law, she laughed, as if she had said something incredibly witty. I remained silent. Cody deserved his academic success. The fact that I paid for his university education was just an opportunity that he took advantage of thanks to his intellect. Finally, Cody himself appeared, my red-haired grandson, now a grown man of 28, in an elegant tuxedo, nervously adjusting his tie. Grandpa, he hugged me, and for a moment I saw that 8-year-old boy looking through a microscope again. I'm so glad you're here. None of this would have happened without you. If only he knew how literally true that was. 2 months ago, Russell came to me with a small request. The Prescott family insisted on a grand wedding, and Russell's financial situation did not allow him to meet their standards. And I agreed to pay a significant portion of the expenses, almost 40% of the total, out of my savings. Not for Russell or Verity, but for Cody's happiness. This is your day, Cody. I patted him on the shoulder. You deserve the best. The photo shoot lasted an agonizingly long time. Paige was constantly bossing everyone around, telling them where to stand. Of course, I was placed on the edge so that the photo could be cropped if necessary. Mr. Hampter, perhaps you should sit down, Celeste Prescott asked with feigned concern in her voice. At your age, standing for long periods of time is tiring. At my age, Mrs. Prescott, I can still stand on the deck of a research vessel for hours during a storm, I replied with a smile. I think I can handle a photo shoot. Her smile became strained and her eyes cold. When the photographer finally announced a break, I went out into the garden behind the church to catch my breath. The headache that had been plaguing me for the last few days was starting to get worse again. Perhaps it was related to my diagnosis, or maybe it was just a reaction to stress. I sat down on a bench under an old oak tree and closed my eyes. I remembered the day Dr. Hammond called me into his office after my regular annual checkup. Winnold, there are some abnormalities in your test results, he said, avoiding my gaze. I'd like you to have an MRI and some additional tests done. I knew something was wrong. In my 40 years of friendship with Robert Hammond, I had learned to recognize the tone of his voice when the news was bad. A week later, the diagnosis was confirmed. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4, metastasis to the liver. Treatment could prolong my life, but it couldn't save it. How long, was all I asked. 6 months, maybe a little longer with chemotherapy. I decided then that I wouldn't tell the family until after the wedding. Why cast a shadow over such a day? Cody deserved unclouded happiness, without the shadow of his grandfather's impending death. There you are, Paige's voice brought me back to reality. The ceremony is about to begin. You need to take your place. She looked at me with poorly concealed irritation, as if I were deliberately complicating her life by my very existence. I'm coming, Paige, I replied, slowly getting up from the bench. Listen, her voice softened, her eyes narrowed. I understand that you want to be part of all this, but maybe it would be better if you didn't stay until the end of the reception. You look tired. Besides, the young people will want to have fun, dance. Don't worry, I interrupted her. I know when to leave. If only she knew how literally I meant that. The church filled with guests. I sat in the front row next to Russell, who kept checking his phone for messages. When the wedding music started and Verity began her walk down the aisle with her father, I saw Cody's face. It glowed with such happiness, such pure joy, that my heart ached. He truly loved this girl. I hoped with all my heart that I wasn't wrong about Verity, that behind her cold exterior was a kind heart capable of loving my grandson the way he deserved. The ceremony was beautiful and touching. Cody and Verity exchanged vows, and when the priest declared them husband and wife, the hall erupted in applause. After the ceremony, the guests went to the Beaverton Grand Hotel, the most luxurious place in town, where the reception was to be held. On the way, I felt another wave of pain, this time stronger. I had to pull over and take a painkiller. The hotel's banquet hall was decorated with the kind of excessive splendor that is only possible with an unlimited budget. White orchids, crystal chandeliers, silk draperies, everything screamed wealth and status. My modest contribution to the wedding seemed to dissolve in this sea of ostentatious luxury. I took my place at the family table, feeling increasingly detached from what was happening. Verity's cousin sat next to me, but after several attempts to strike up a conversation, she left me alone, clearly deciding that the old man was not worth her effort. The pre-wedding dinner was scheduled at the Azure Coast Restaurant, a fashionable establishment in downtown Beaverton owned by an old friend of Alfred Prescott's. I arrived 15 minutes early, a habit of punctuality developed over years of scientific work, when being late for a research vessel could mean being left behind on shore. The rest to which follow me. The private dining room was already half full of guests. I spotted several of Cody's colleagues from the Research Institute, a couple of professors from the university where I once taught, and, of course, the entire Prescott family. Alfred was standing at the bar, sipping something amber-colored, undoubtedly expensive scotch, and chatting animatedly with two men in impeccable suits who laughed at his every remark with exaggerated enthusiasm. Celeste Prescott sat at the center table like a queen at a reception. Her perfectly styled silver hair didn't move even when she nodded in time with the words of her companion, an elderly woman wearing so much jewelry that she resembled a walking display case. My son Russell and his wife Paige were not yet in sight. I decided to sit down at one of the side tables to quietly observe what was happening. My health had been failing me more and more often in recent days, and I was trying to conserve my strength. "Mr. Hampter, you're here already," Verity's voice sounded behind me, making me turn around. She looked impeccable in an ivory silk dress with a pearl necklace around her neck. "Cody will be so happy. He's running late at the lab, but he'll be here soon." "Hello, Verity," I tried to smile. "I hope all the preparations are going smoothly." "Oh, it's a real nightmare." She rolled her eyes dramatically. "The florist mixed up the shade of the orchids, and the hotel chef tried to convince me that scallops would be better than langoustines. Can you imagine? As if I don't know the difference." She spoke quickly, gesturing so that the pearls around her neck bounced with every movement. I noticed the waiter turned pale and began to apologize, but Verity had already lost interest in him, turning back to me with a smile as if nothing had happened. "So what was I talking about?" "Oh yes, the preparations. You know, organizing the perfect wedding is a real art." I looked at her, trying to hide my growing unease. The ease with which she had switched from aggression to small talk frightened me more than the outburst itself. In my decades of working in the scientific community, I had met many people with narcissistic tendencies, but Verity seemed to surpass them all. "Of course," I replied cautiously, "but it's important to remember that the wedding is just one day and marriage is a lifetime." Her smile became slightly strained. "Of course, Mr. Hampter, but you can't make a first impression twice, can you? And the wedding is the first impression of our family." She said "our family" as if she had already mentally excluded me from that concept. The appearance of Celeste Prescott saved me from having to respond. Verity's mother approached us with a slight look of disdain on her face. "Verity, dear, you need to greet the Bardsleys. They flew in from London especially for your wedding," she said, giving me a quick, appraising look. "Good evening, Mr. Hampter, is it?" "Yes," I nodded. "We met at the engagement party." Of course," she waved her hand dismissively, clearly not remembering. "Verity, let's go. Alfred wants you to talk to Dr. Crane about the possibility of an internship in his lab after the honeymoon." Verity obediently followed her mother, leaving me alone. I noticed how she straightened her back and squared her shoulders as she approached her father, like a soldier reporting to her commander. I wonder if she always reacts this way to her parents, or only in public. A few minutes later, Russell and Paige appeared. My son looked impeccable as always in his gray suit, although I noticed new wrinkles around his eyes. Paige walked beside him, constantly looking around, as if assessing who among those present was worthy of her attention. "Father," Russell nodded to me reservedly, "it's good that you're here already. We were afraid you might have trouble getting here on your own." "I can still drive, Russell," I replied, "and I remember the way to downtown." Paige smiled tensely. "We're just looking out for you, Winold. After all, at your age—" "At my age, people tend to value their independence even more than when they're young," I interrupted her. "How's the firm, Russell?" "Russell, just say it straight out. Hartman stole another big client from under your nose. If you had been more persistent—" "Not now, Paige," Russell said quietly but firmly. I noticed his fingers tighten around the glass. The relationship between my son and his wife had always been tense, but in recent years it had gotten even worse. Paige seemed to be constantly disappointed in her husband, and he became more and more withdrawn. "Here comes the groom," someone announced, and all heads turned toward the entrance, where my grandson Cody appeared. He looked a little disheveled, with a flush on his cheeks from rushing, but happy. His red hair, as unruly as his grandmother Elizabeth's, stuck out in all directions, despite his obvious attempts to smooth it down. "Sorry I'm late," he exclaimed, approaching Verity and kissing her on the cheek. The experiment took longer than I planned. Verity smiled tensely. "Darling, we agreed no labs today." Her voice was sweet, but her eyes showed irritation. "Everyone's already gathered." I know, but the results were so promising." Cody turned, noticed me, and beamed. "Grandpa!" He came over and gave me a big hug. "How are you? You look a little tired." "I'm fine," I lied, hiding the pain that had started a few minutes ago. "Just a long day." Cody looked at me intently, and for a moment I thought he suspected something. But then Verity called him, and the moment was lost. Dinner began with welcoming speeches. Alfred Prescott stood up first, holding a glass of champagne. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, and all conversation ceased. "We are gathered here today to celebrate the union of two remarkable young people, two brilliant scientists whose research, I am sure, will be of great benefit to our company. I mean, to the scientific community," he laughed, and the guests obligingly joined in. I watched Verity while her father spoke. She said, although, of course, he glanced in my direction, of a slightly more modest background than we are accustomed to in our circle. A quiet chuckle rippled through the room. I kept a straight face. Ridicule of my unprestigious profession was nothing new. People like Alfred Prescott never understood the value of fundamental science unless it brought immediate financial gain. Cody blushed slightly but continued to smile. I knew he was proud of his family and had never been ashamed of our modest background, as Prescott put it. After several toasts, the first courses were served. I sat at a table with Russell, Paige, and several family friends I barely knew. Cody and Verity were at the center table with the bride's parents and several important guests. I watched Verity interact with the waitstaff. Every time a waiter approached their table, she displayed the same haughtiness as before. Once, she even snapped her fingers to summon the waiter, as if he were not a human being, but a trained animal. Cody seemed oblivious to this, completely absorbed in conversation with an elderly professor sitting next to him. I was concerned about this blind spot in his perception. Or maybe he saw it but chose to ignore it. Either way, it didn't bode well for their future family life. When dessert was served, I decided I needed to try to talk to Cody alone. The moment presented itself when he headed toward the bar. "Cody?" I approached him, trying to hide the limp that had become more noticeable as the pain intensified. "Do you have a minute?" "Of course, Grandpa," he beamed when he saw me. "How's your evening? Impressive, isn't it?" Alfred insisted on this restaurant, although Verity and I would have preferred something more intimate. "The evening is wonderful," I agreed, "but I wanted to talk about something else, about Verity." His smile became a little tense. "What about her? I know she can seem a little intense, but that's only because she's a perfectionist." "Cody, I've noticed how she treats the staff," I said bluntly. "It worries me," he sighed. "Grandpa, I know you're concerned, but it's just wedding stress. She's not always like that. Besides, she was raised differently than we were. Her family, well, let's just say they have different standards." "Standards of politeness and respect for people should be universal," I remarked gently. A person shows their true colors not when communicating with their equals, but when talking to those of lower status. Verity is just nervous. Cody defended himself more and more actively. She wants everything to be perfect, and sometimes that comes across in the worst way. But you haven't seen her in the lab. A brilliant mind, incredible intuition. We're making amazing discoveries together. I realized he wasn't ready to hear the truth. Love and the upcoming wedding had blinded him, forcing him to see only what he wanted to see. I believe you, I said, deciding not to press the issue. And I wish you happiness. Just remember that marriage is a partnership, and it's important that you share not only scientific interests but also common values. Cody smiled with relief, clearly pleased that the conversation had not escalated into a confrontation. Thanks, Grandpa. You always know what to say. By the way, I wanted to ask, are you sure you'll be okay tomorrow? You seem paler than usual. Just a little tired, I tried to brush off his concern. It's normal at my age. Cody was about to add something, but at that moment, Verity approached us, wrapping her arm possessively around his shoulder. Honey, Dad's looking for you. He wants to discuss something important about our research. She glanced quickly at me. I'm sorry, Mr. Hampter, but it's really urgent. Of course, I nodded. We're done. Cody let Verity lead him away with a guilty expression. I watched them go with a heavy heart. The ease with which she had pulled him away from our conversation, the way he had obediently followed her despite his concern for me, all of it was alarming. I decided to step out onto the restaurant terrace for some fresh air. The pain was getting worse, and I needed to take my medication. The terrace was quiet and cool, and the view of Beaverton at night with its twinkling lights reminded me of the times when Elizabeth and I loved to walk through the city in the evening, holding hands and dreaming about the future. What would you do, Liz? I asked her silently, looking up at the stars. She had always been the better part of me, wiser, kinder, more patient. She would have known how to talk to Cody so that he would listen without getting offended. Suddenly, after all, he's 72. He can't live there alone forever. It's dangerous. What if he falls? What if something happens? Sunny Harbor Nursing Home is a great place, with good care. And most importantly, Paige added, with undisguised greed in her voice, they accept real estate as payment. We could arrange for lifetime care in exchange for the house. He won't even notice the difference and will finally be able to... I couldn't take it anymore and took a step forward, deliberately bumping into a chair standing nearby. The sound interrupted their conversation. Dad? Russell emerged from behind the tub, his face a mixture of surprise and confusion. Have you been here long? Long enough, I replied calmly, though inside I was seething with anger and disappointment. And I've heard enough. Paige followed him out, her eyes narrowed. Winold, you misunderstand. We're just worried about you. Don't bother, Paige, I interrupted her. I understand perfectly well what you're worried about. And let me make one thing clear. I am of sound mind and memory, and I have no intention of selling my house or moving to Sunny Harbor or anywhere else. This house is mine, and I will decide what to do with it. Russell took a step forward, his voice softening, almost ingratiating. Father, please understand, we are genuinely concerned. Your health... My health is my business, I snapped, and when I need help, I'll ask for it. Now, if you don't mind, I'd like to get back to the celebration. I don't want to miss a minute of my grandson's happiness. I walked past them, feeling their eyes on my back. The pain in my stomach intensified, but I kept my posture straight. They would not see my weakness. Not today. Return instead, perhaps Cody's enthusiasm, they can achieve a lot. I noticed how she pronounced the word enthusiasm, as if it were something frivolous, childish. Another way of hinting that, in her opinion, Cody was not Verity's equal. Cody is one of the most talented young scientists I know, I said firmly. His work on the bioluminescence of deep-sea organisms has been recognized even in Sweden. Celeste smiled condescendingly. Of course, but in the business world, it's not just scientific achievements that matter, but also the right connections, you understand? Without the support of companies like ours, many research projects simply don't get funded. And without researchers like my grandson, your company wouldn't get new patents, I countered. So it's a mutually beneficial partnership, isn't it? Her smile became strained. Of course, of course. Well, I watched Verity mingle with the guests, moving from one group to another with a practiced smile that never reached her eyes. She was deferential to her parents, charming to potential investors, and condescendingly polite to Cody's friends. Russell and Paige returned to the room, carefully avoiding my gaze. They joined a group of their friends, laughing loudly and gesturing animatedly. The classic behavior of people trying to show that they are having a great time and are completely unembarrassed. Finally, Cody noticed me and came over, his face showing slight concern. "Grandpa, are you okay? You're very quiet today." "Just watching things happen," I smiled, trying to look more cheerful. "Big social events have never been my thing, you know." "Yeah, I remember how you always ran off to your office during Mom's parties." He laughed. "But you'll be okay tomorrow, right? It's very important to me that you be there, Grandpa. You're the only one who has always supported my scientific interests, even when Dad thought they were a waste of time." My heart sank. Despite all my doubts about his choice of life partner, I couldn't let that cloud this moment. "Of course I'll be there, Cody. Nothing will stop me from seeing my grandson get married." He hugged me, and for a moment I saw in him again the little boy who used to look at the marine specimens in my lab with such excitement. "Thanks, Grandpa. You know, He paused, searching for the right words. "I hope I have to go," Cody said apologetically. "This is Professor Lindgren from Stockholm. He's very interested in our research." "Go," I said, letting go of his hand. "And Cody, I'm proud of you. I've always been proud of you." He smiled and hurried over to his fiancée. I watched as they approached an elderly man with a neat gray beard, as Verity took Cody's arm possessively as she began to speak, clearly introducing my grandson. I decided it was time to leave. The pain had become too intense, and I needed to take my medicine and lie down. Tomorrow was an important day, and I wanted to save my strength. After saying goodbye to a few guests, I quietly left the restaurant. It was cool outside, and the stars were shining brightly in the cloudless sky. I took a deep breath of the night air, trying to collect my thoughts. What I heard today from my son and daughter-in-law was nothing new. Their attitude toward me had been clear for a long time. But the way Verity spoke to the waitstaff, the way she interacted with her parents, the way she subtly but persistently controlled Cody, all of this confirmed my worst fears. My grandson had married a woman who saw him only as a stepping stone to success, to recognition in the scientific community, to access to research grants. And I didn't know how to open his eyes to this without breaking his heart. As I got into the car, I remembered that I had left a gift for the newlyweds, an envelope with a check for a substantial amount of money to help them with the down payment on their own home. I had planned to give it to them tomorrow at the wedding, but now I had my doubts. Wouldn't this money be another way for Verity to tie Cody to her, to make him even more dependent? But there was no choice. I couldn't refuse to help my grandson, even if I had doubts about his bride. And as it seemed to me, this gift might be one of the last I would ever give him. I started the car and slowly drove onto the road leading to my house on the lake. Tomorrow would decide a lot, not only for Cody and Verity, but for me as well. The morning of the wedding day greeted me with a heavy, leaden sky. It seemed as if nature was reflecting my inner state. I woke up from another bout of pain an hour before the alarm went off. The painkillers didn't work right away, and I lay there for a long time, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the day ahead and how it might be one of the last significant events in my life. The ceremony was scheduled for 2 o'clock in the afternoon at the Beaverton Grand Hotel, the same place where the pre-wedding dinner had been held yesterday. Cody and Verity decided to hold both the ceremony and the reception in one place so that the guests would not have to move around. A practical decision, typical of my grandson. I shaved carefully, trying not to notice how much my face had thinned in recent weeks. Then I put on my best suit, a dark blue one that, according to Elizabeth, perfectly matched the color of my eyes. I tied the tie Cody had given me for my 70th birthday, dark green, with tiny images of seahorses. "So you'll always remember the sea even when you're wearing a suit," my grandson had said at the time. I put the envelope with the gift and the house documents in my breast pocket. After yesterday's conversation with Russell and Paige, I decided that the house should go to Cody after my death. Not so that he could live there. I understood that his career would most likely take him away from Beaverton, but to protect the place from becoming just another asset in my son's investment portfolio. I arrived at the hotel an hour before the ceremony began. The banquet hall had been transformed beyond recognition. Rows of white chairs, an archway covered in flowers at the far wall, a string quartet tuning their instruments in the corner. Everything looked perfect and yet completely impersonal, like a setting from a fashion magazine rather than a place where two destinies were about to be joined. "Winold!" Paige spotted me and immediately came over, her face expressing a mixture of tension and false joy. "You're early. It's good that you're here already. The photographer wants to take some pictures of the groom's family before the ceremony begins." She spoke to me as if yesterday's conversation had never happened. It was typical of Paige to pretend that unpleasant moments simply didn't exist if she ignored them long enough. "Where's Cody?" I asked, not falling for her pretense. "In one of the preparation rooms," she nodded toward the side corridor. "He's nervous like all grooms. Russell is with him." I headed for the indicated door, ignoring her attempts to stop me with further conversation. After knocking, I heard Cody's voice inviting me in. My grandson was standing in front of the mirror, adjusting his bow tie. His red hair was neatly combed, and his face showed a mixture of excitement and joyful anticipation. Russell was sitting in the corner of the room, checking something on his phone. "Grandpa," Cody beamed when he saw me. "How do I look? Is my bow tie crooked?" "You look great," I said, walking over and adjusting his bow tie slightly. "A real gentleman scientist." Cody laughed nervously. "I feel like I'm about to defend my doctorate before the strictest committee in the world." "Marriage is a little more complicated than a doctorate," I said with a smile, "but the reward is greater." Russell finally looked up from his phone and nodded to me. "Father." There was no warmth in his voice, only wariness. He was clearly expecting me to bring up yesterday's conversation and was preparing to defend himself. Russell, since childhood, he had tried to be a peacemaker between me and Russell, often to the detriment of his own interests. "You're right," I agreed. "Today is Cody and Verity's day." Speaking of the bride, I tried to keep my voice neutral. Cody was observant enough to pick up even the slightest hint of my true feelings about his choice. The wedding planner, a young man with a headset and a tablet, peeked into the room. I nodded, not trusting my voice. What could I say? "I think you're making a mistake. She doesn't love you the way you deserve." No, it was his choice, his life. All I could do was hope that I was wrong in my assessment. "Then go," I said, hugging him. "And remember, no matter what happens, I'm always on your side." Cody hugged me tightly in return, and for a moment I felt him press against me like a little boy seeking protection. Then he straightened up, nodded, and left the room with the organizer. Russell got up from his chair. "It's time for us to go too," he said, not looking me in the eye. "Let's go. Paige is probably nervous." We walked out into the hall, which was now filled with guests. Cody was already standing under the arch, his face expressing eager anticipation. The bridesmaids appeared in pale blue dresses, followed by a little girl scattering rose petals. And finally, Verity entered on her father's arm. Her dress was a true work of art. White silk and lace embroidered with tiny pearls, a long train carried by two girls. A veil covered her face, but even through it, you could see her eyes shining. I had to admit that at that moment she looked truly happy. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe she really loved Cody, and her coldness and arrogance were just a protective mask hiding her insecurity. The ceremony began. The priest spoke of love, fidelity, and mutual support. After the ceremony, the guests moved to the adjacent hall for cocktails while the hotel staff quickly transformed the ceremony space into a banquet hall. I watched as Verity and Cody accepted congratulations, posed for the photographer, and exchanged quick kisses at the request of guests ringing little bells. Everything looked perfect, flawless, and completely insincere, at least on Verity's part. As soon as the cameras weren't pointed at her, her smile disappeared and her eyes became calculating, appraising. I saw her whispering instructions to the wedding coordinator, frowning in dissatisfaction when something wasn't to her liking. Cody seemed oblivious to these changes, completely absorbed in his happiness and the attention of his guests. Or maybe he noticed, but decided to turn a blind eye today. The banquet began with the grand entrance of the newlyweds into the hall. The tables were decorated with arrangements of white orchids and blue delphiniums, and fine porcelain and crystal sparkled in the light of the chandeliers. Every detail screamed luxury and status. I sat at the head table, but at the very edge, next to some distant relative of Verity's who barely spoke to me. Russell and Paige sat closer to the center, next to the Prescotts, chatting animatedly with them as if they were old friends. The first toasts were given by the best man, Cody's colleague from the lab, and the maid of honor, her cousin. Standard speeches full of cliches about love and a happy future. Then Alfred Prescott stood up, holding a glass of champagne. "When my daughter first brought Cody to our house," he began, "I confess I was skeptical. A young scientist with no connections, no fortune." He paused and a polite chuckle rippled through the room. "But with a brilliant mind and a sincere love for my daughter. And I thought, well, maybe that's enough." He paused again, and I felt myself tense, waiting for him to continue. "Today, I am happy to admit that I was right," Prescott continued. "Cody has proven himself worthy of my Verity. Their work together is already bearing fruit, and their research has enormous potential for our company, and of course, for science as a whole." He raised his glass higher. "To the newlyweds, to their happy and productive future." The guests joined in the toast, and I noted the choice of words. A productive future. Not loving, not harmonious, but specifically productive. It was as if Prescott were talking about a merger of companies, not the marriage of two people. After several toasts, dinner was served. Exquisite dishes followed one after another. Waiters glided silently between tables, filling glasses. I hardly touched my food. The pain had intensified again, and the sight of food only made it worse. At one point, I decided to go to the bathroom to take my medicine. Passing by a small side room with the door ajar, I heard voices and stopped involuntarily. It was Verity and her mother. "I just don't understand why he has to sit at the main table," Verity said irritably. "He barely touched his food. Looks like he's about to die right here, and he's ruining all the photos." "Honey, he's your husband's grandfather," Celeste replied in the tone one uses with a capricious child. "It would be strange to seat him in the far corner." "Strange or not, this old man is a pitiful burden," Verity said with undisguised contempt in her voice. "And believe me, he will not be part of our family life. Right after our honeymoon, we will arrange for him to move to Sunny Harbor. Russell has almost persuaded him to sign the papers for the home. Out of sight, out of mind." I froze, feeling the blood drain from my face. So Verity was also involved in the plan to send me to a nursing home. And not just involved. Judging by her tone, it was largely her idea. "Verity, dear, lower your voice," Celeste said. "The walls have ears. Of course, the old man can't live alone, but it's better to have these conversations behind closed doors." "He can't hear anything anyway," Verity snorted. "He's probably half deaf. Besides, according to Russell, he has health problems." "Maybe we won't even have to wait long." They laughed, and I felt something break inside me. Not anger, not resentment, more like a deep, piercing disappointment. In the family my grandson was joining, in the person he had chosen as his life partner. I quietly moved away from the door and continued on my way to the restroom. There, looking at my reflection in the mirror, a pale, gaunt face with deep shadows under my eyes, I made a decision. Cody deserved to know the truth. About my illness, about Verity, about everything. Returning to the hall, I saw that the host was announcing the time for free toast from the guests. Several people were already lined up at the microphone, mostly colleagues and friends of the newlyweds. I walked over and stood at the end of the line. My heart was beating fast, but my resolve only grew stronger. I listened to the toasts, funny stories about Cody at university, touching memories of how he and Verity met, wishes for happiness and success. Finally, it was my turn. I slowly walked up to the microphone, feeling the eyes of everyone present on me. Verity visibly tensed, her smile becoming strained. Cody, on the other hand, beamed when he saw that I had decided to make a toast. "Good evening," I began, surprised at how calm my voice sounded. "My name is Winold Hampter, and I am the groom's grandfather. I'm not the most eloquent speaker, I admit, but today I feel the need to say a few words." A soft murmur rippled through the room. Probably many of the guests, especially on Verity's side, didn't even know who I was. Cody, my grandson, I continued, looking directly at him. Since childhood, you have shown remarkable curiosity and kindness. I remember how you brought home injured birds and tried to nurse them back to health. How you could watch the tide for hours, recording all your observations in a little notebook. How you asked questions that even I, with my scientific experience, couldn't always answer. Cody smiled, his eyes shining with emotion, and perhaps from the champagne he had drunk. I always knew you would become an outstanding scientist, and I am proud that I was able to help you on this path. By paying for your university education, supporting your research, and yes, making a significant contribution to the organization of this wedding. A surprised murmur rippled through the room. I noticed Russell tense up, and Alfred Prescott lean forward slightly, his eyes narrowing. I won't hide the fact, I continued, feeling each word become harder to say, that in recent weeks I have had mixed feelings about this marriage. Not because of you, Cody, but because of some information that has come to my attention. Now the room was completely silent. I saw Verity turn pale, her eyes widening with alarm. 2 weeks ago, I was diagnosed with stage 3 pancreatic cancer, I said, and heard someone among the guests gasp quietly. The doctors say I have about 6 months left. I decided not to spoil your wedding with this news, Cody. I wanted this day to remain a happy memory. Cody stood up abruptly, his face contorted with shock and grief. Grandpa, he began, but I raised my hand to stop him. Let me finish, Cody. This is important. I took a deep breath and continued. Today I overheard a conversation that made me change my mind about keeping quiet. A conversation in which your new wife called me a pathetic burden and told her mother that I won't be part of your family life. A shocked murmur rippled through the room. Verity jumped up, her face contorted with rage and fear. That's a lie, she exclaimed. He's making it up. I also learned, I continued, ignoring her outburst, that there is a plan to send me to the Sunny Harbor nursing home right after your honeymoon. A plan involving not only my son and his wife, I glanced at Russell, who sat with his head bowed low, but also your new family, Cody. I took it so you can make your own choices, real choices, not dictated by financial considerations or outside pressure. I placed the envelope on the table in front of Cody, who stood frozen, a look of utter shock on his face. I love you, my boy, I said quietly, and I will always love you, no matter which path you choose. But I want you to know the truth, the whole truth. I stepped away from the microphone, feeling a strange lightness, as if a huge weight had been lifted from my shoulders. Verity stood clutching the edge of the table so tightly that her knuckles were white. Her face was contorted with rage and humiliation. How dare you, she cried. This is our day. You had no right. She didn't finish her sentence. Her eyes rolled back, and she began to sink to the floor. Alfred Prescott managed to catch his daughter before she fell, but it was obvious that Verity had lost consciousness. Chaos broke out in the hall. Guests jumped up from their seats, some shouting for a doctor, others simply standing, watching in shock. Cody rushed toward Verity, but then stopped halfway as if unsure where he should go, to his wife or to me. I turned and slowly walked toward the exit. My part in this story was over. Now the decision was up to Cody. I left the hotel amid the noise and shouting coming from the banquet hall. Ambulance sirens were already sounding somewhere nearby. Obviously, one of the guests had called for medical help for Verity. I wasn't too concerned about that. I knew she was fine. Just a normal fainting spell from shock and humiliation. Nothing more. I got into the car but didn't drive off right away. My hand, even if typical Russell, instead of worrying about my health or at least trying to understand my motives, he immediately thinks about the potential legal consequences and how not to ruin relations with the influential Prescott family. My house greeted me with silence and coolness. I took off my suit, took a painkiller, and sank wearily into a chair by the window overlooking the lake. The moon reflected in the dark water, creating a silvery path to the horizon. How many evenings had Elizabeth and I spent here, watching this eternal play of light and shadow? Now I could almost physically feel her presence nearby, as if she were sitting in the chair next to me, as she used to, with a book on her lap and a cup of herbal tea. What would you do, Liz? I asked myself. Would you be on my side in this battle? I knew the answer. Elizabeth always valued honesty above all else. The truth can hurt, Winnie, but lies kill slowly and painfully, she often repeated. I fell asleep right in my chair, plunged into a restless sleep full of blurred images and indistinct voices. The next morning began with a deafening knock on the door. I struggled to get up, feeling every muscle ache from the uncomfortable position I had spent the night in. Russell stood in the doorway, his face contorted with rage. Are you happy now? He spat, pushing past me into the house. You ruined everything. The whole wedding turned into a farce. Verity spent the night on an IV. The Prescotts are talking about a lawsuit for defamation and public humiliation. And Cody, he paused for a second, his voice trembling. Cody doesn't know what to think or who to believe. I walked silently into the kitchen and poured myself some water. Russell's anger didn't bother me. I had expected this reaction. Are you listening to me, Father? Russell followed me. This isn't some scientific discussion where you can drop a bombshell and walk away. These are people's lives, real lives. I understand that perfectly well, I replied calmly, and that's exactly why I did what I did. Cody had a right to know what kind of woman he was marrying and what kind of family he was now standing behind. And you think that after what you said, he'll just dump her and run to you? Russell smiled sarcastically. He loves Verity, and your accusations sound like the ravings of a jealous old man who can't accept that his grandson has grown up and started his own family. I shook my head. I don't expect him to leave her. I just wanted him to know the truth. What happens next is his choice. What about the truth about your illness? Russell lowered his voice, now sounding not only angry but hurt. Why are we finding out about this at Cody's wedding? Why didn't you tell us sooner? What difference would it have made if I had? I looked him straight in the eye. Would you have started caring more? You're going to need help. Russell rubbed his nose. I've already made arrangements, I interrupted him. Vivian has agreed to help me. Vivian? He raised his eyebrows. Vivian Clark? Your former colleague? I nodded. Vivian Clark had been my research partner at the Beaverton Bay Research Center for almost 20 years. A brilliant mind, a sharp tongue, and boundless energy. Yes, I sat down at the kitchen table, feeling suddenly weak. The painkiller was wearing off, and the pain was starting to return. A few minutes later, Russell returned, his face tense. Cody wants to talk to you, he said. He'll be here this evening. Without Verity. I nodded, feeling both relief and anxiety. I had a difficult conversation with my grandson ahead of me. What about the Prescotts? I asked. Are they a public retraction on your part? Russell shrugged. A statement that you were emotionally unstable due to the news of your illness and misinterpreted what you heard. I shook my head. That's not going to happen. I know exactly what I heard. Then prepare for war, Russell sighed. The Prescotts are not the type to forgive humiliation. Alfred has already called the dean of the university where you used to teach, trying to find out if you have a history of mental health issues or drug abuse. I couldn't help but admire the speed with which Prescott had launched his attack. In less than 12 hours, he had already attempted to undermine my reputation and paint me as an unstable old man. Let him dig, I said calmly. My past is clean. Russell looked at me with sudden weariness. Why all this, Father? You're dying. Why spend your last months on feuds and lawsuits? Because the truth is more important than peace of mind, I replied. And because I love Cody enough to risk his temporary resentment for his long-term happiness? Russell shook his head. You've always been stubborn. Mom was the only one who could reason with you. He headed for the door but stopped at the threshold. I'll come by with Cody tonight. And Dad, no matter what, I hope you know that He faltered, clearly unable to say the word love. That I care. After he left, I called Vivian. Her cheerful voice always had a calming effect on me. Winnie, how was the wedding? I hope you didn't fall asleep during the vows? She laughed, but quickly noticed my silence. What happened? I told her everything. About Verity's conversation with her mother, my speech, the ensuing chaos, and the Prescott's threats. My God, Winnie, she exhaled when I finished. You've always loved dramatic entrances, but this surpassed even your doctoral defense, when you refuted your advisor's theory right in the middle of your presentation. That's different, I objected. That was about scientific principles. Now it's about my grandson's life. I know, Her voice became serious. And I'm proud of you. Not everyone would have found the courage to do what you did. We talked a little more about practical matters, her move, my treatment schedule, what we would need to buy for the house. It was a familiar, comfortable conversation between two old friends who knew each other so well that much remained unsaid but understood. The day dragged on slowly. I tried to read, but I couldn't concentrate. My thoughts kept returning to Cody, to his face when I gave my speech. Shock, disbelief, pain. Would our relationship survive this ordeal? Or would I lose the only person in my family who truly understood and loved me? Around 5 o'clock in the evening, the phone rang. An unknown number. Mr. Hampter? The unfamiliar male voice sounded professionally detached. My name is Lawrence Blackwell. I am the Prescott family's lawyer. I am calling to offer you the opportunity to settle our dispute without going to court. I'm listening, I replied curtly. My clients are willing to drop the defamation suit on the condition that you sign a statement saying that you misinterpreted what you heard due to stress and your state of health. They also request that you make a public apology to Miss Verity Prescott. Sorry, Mrs. Verity Hampter, at a small family gathering. Naturally, all medical expenses related to your treatment will be covered in full by Mr. Prescott's company. I remained silent, considering the offer. It was generous from a purely practical point of view. No court cases, guaranteed payment for treatment that could cost hundreds of thousands, and all I had to do was say I was wrong. Mr. Hampter? The voice on the line became a little impatient. Are you considering our offer? No, I finally replied. I refuse. I'm sorry. The lawyer clearly hadn't expected that answer. I won't lie to save your client's reputation, I said firmly. I know exactly what I heard, and no medical bills will make me give up the truth. There was a pause. Mr. Hampter, I don't think you fully understand the situation. If this goes to court, your chances of winning are slim. It will be your word against Mrs. Hampter and her mother's. You have no recording of the conversation, no witnesses. Besides, considering your health, I have a clear mind and a clear conscience, Mr. Blackwell, I interrupted him, and that's enough. Tell Alfred Prescott that I'm not afraid of his threats. If he wants to sue, let him sue. I'm ready. I hung up the phone feeling strangely relieved. The bridges were burned, there was no turning back. Oddly enough, this certainty brought me peace. Evening came sooner than I expected. Russell arrived with Cody around 8. My grandson looked exhausted. Dark circles under his eyes, his face pale, his red hair tousled, as if he had been running his fingers through it constantly out of nervousness. Grandpa, he nodded at me, not coming over for a hug as usual. Cody, I took a step back, letting him into the house. Come in. Would you like some tea? He shook his head. No, thanks. I won't be long. We went into the living room. Russell stayed in the kitchen, giving us a chance to talk alone. Cody sat on the edge of the sofa, staring at his hands. Why didn't you tell me about the diagnosis right away? His first question was the one I least expected. I didn't want to ruin your wedding, I replied honestly, but instead you decided to make a public scene, accusing my wife of, he paused, searching for words, disrespect and manipulation. I took a deep breath. Cody, I didn't plan any of this. I really wanted to keep my illness a secret until after the wedding, but when I heard Verity say that I was a pathetic burden who wouldn't be part of your family life, I couldn't stay silent. You deserve to know the truth. Except Verity says she never said anything like that. Cody finally looked up. She says you made it all up because you never approved of our marriage. I shook my head. I heard every word, Cody. She said it to her mother when she thought no one could hear them. They laughed about the possibility that I wouldn't have to wait long because of my health. Cody flinched. I've known Verity for 3 years, Grandpa. She couldn't have said that. We often see what we want to see in people, I said gently, especially when we love them. Or maybe you heard what you wanted to hear. Cody's voice took on a challenging tone. You never hid your feelings for Verity. You were always reserved with her, always kept your distance. I remained silent, knowing that no words would convince him now. He had to come to the truth himself, in his own time. Verity is in the hospital, Cody continued after a pause. She's having a nervous breakdown. The doctors say the stress of public humiliation could have caused a miscarriage if she had been pregnant. I shuddered at those words. Despite everything I thought about Verity, I never wished her physical harm. I'm sorry she's suffering, I said sincerely, but I can't give up the truth, Cody, even if that truth is painful. Her father wants to sue you. Cody ran a hand through his hair. For defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and a whole list of other things. He says he'll bankrupt you with legal fees, even if he doesn't win the case. I know, I nodded. His lawyer already called me. And? Cody raised his eyebrows. I refused their settlement offer. They want it as if my last months of life should be spent in quiet decline, meekly accepting every lie and injustice. Because the truth is all I have left, Cody, I replied quietly. I earned my scientific reputation by always seeking the truth, even when it was inconvenient or dangerous for my career. I'm not going to betray my principles now at the end of the road. What about me? Cody's voice sounded pained. He headed, and remember that I'll always be on your side, whatever you decide. He nodded, still not looking at me, and left. Russell appeared from the kitchen. I heard your conversation, he admitted, and I don't understand you, Father. Can't you see how this is tearing him apart? I can, I said, sinking into a chair, suddenly feeling terribly tired. But the lie would destroy him even more, albeit more slowly. Russell shook his head. I'm going with him. He's not in any condition to drive. After they left, I sat in the dark for a long time, looking at the lake and thinking about the price I had paid for this truth. Perhaps I had lost my grandson, the only person in the family whose love was sincere and unconditional. Perhaps the last months of my life would be filled with lawsuits and hostility from those I considered close to me. But I couldn't have done otherwise. I couldn't betray my principles and values for the sake of comfort and false peace. The next 2 weeks passed in a strange numbness. I began a course of chemotherapy that exhausted me physically, but the pain of the treatment was nothing compared to the pain of Cody's silence. He didn't call, he didn't write, he didn't visit. I learned from Russell that he and Verity had postponed their honeymoon because of her condition and that they were temporarily living at the Prescott's house while Verity recovered. The Prescotts had indeed filed a lawsuit, 15 pages of allegations, most of which were obviously fabricated, but serious enough to force me to hire a lawyer. Fortunately, my savings allowed me to do so without any significant financial hardship. Vivian moved into the guest room, as planned. Her presence was a blessing. Not only did she help with practical things like cooking and trips to the hospital, but she also brought life, energy, and optimism to the house, which I sorely needed. Winnie, you won't believe what I found, she exclaimed one morning, bursting into my room with a box in her hands. I was as if, will you help me? She helped me get dressed and go outside. It was a beautiful day. Clear skies, a light breeze from the lake, seagulls crying over the water. We slowly made our way to a small pier where there was a bench that Elizabeth and I had put there many years ago. Do you think Cody will come? Vivian asked suddenly. I sighed. I don't know. I want to believe he will, that his love for me will prove stronger than his resentment. But I'm ready to accept whatever he decides. Vivian took my hand. He'll come, she said confidently. Maybe not right away, but he'll come. He's too much like you. Just as stubborn, but fair. He needs time to see the truth with his own eyes. I was silent, staring at the water and hoping she was right. The thought of leaving without making peace with Cody was unbearable. You know what I think? Vivian continued after a pause. I think you did the right thing. Even if no one else recognizes it, I do. You've always been stubborn to a fault, Winnie, and I've always admired that about you. Even when it cost us a grant from the National Science Foundation, remember? I laughed as I recalled the incident. We had discovered a flaw in the methodology of a study sponsored by the foundation, and I insisted on publicly acknowledging it, even though it meant losing funding. You nearly killed me then, I reminded her. You said I was an idealist without a penny in my pocket and without a brain in my head. And I was right, she squeezed my hand. You're still the same. But you know what? The world needs stubborn idealists like you. Otherwise, everything would go downhill even faster than it is now. We sat on the pier, watching the sun set and talking about the past, our expeditions, discoveries, mistakes, and triumphs. At that moment, despite my illness and family problems, I felt a strange sense of peace. It was as if everything that was meant to happen had happened, and now I could simply watch the final act of my life with a certain detachment. When we got home, we found a message from my lawyer on the answering machine. The Prescotts had offered new terms for a settlement. They would withdraw the lawsuit if I signed a non-disclosure agreement and promised not to communicate with Cody and Verity without their prior consent. "Are they serious?" Vivian exclaimed when she heard this. "They want to forbid you from seeing your own grandson? That's, that's outrageous." I shook my head. "It's desperation. They realize their case is weak, so they're trying to play on my love for Cody. But I won't give in. I won't sign any agreement that restricts my freedom to communicate with my own family." Vivian nodded in agreement. "That's right. Besides, I'm sure Cody would never agree to such terms, even if he's on his wife's side right now." We called the lawyer and informed him of our refusal. He sighed but didn't look surprised. "I thought as much, Mr. Hampter." "Well, we'll prepare for court. The first hearing is scheduled in 3 weeks." After the call, I felt very tired and decided to lie down. Vivian helped me take my medicine and get settled in bed. "Rest, Winnie," she said, touching my shoulder lightly. "Tomorrow's a new day." I closed my eyes, thinking about how many new days I had left and how I would spend them, in court battles or surrounded by those I love. Despite my determination, I couldn't help but wonder, was the truth worth such a high price? But deep down, I knew the answer. It was worth it. It was always worth it. Summer began to fade. The water in the lake lost its summer warmth, and in the mornings a light mist spread over it, creating a picture worthy of an impressionist's brush. I sat on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, watching nature prepare for the change of seasons. This year, for the first time, I keenly felt the parallel between the fading of nature and my own fading. But strangely, it did not cause me fear or despair. Rather, a feeling of deep kinship with the world I had been a part of all these years. 3 months passed in a measured rhythm of chemotherapy, doctor visits, good days and bad days. My body hurt sharp. They called a few times in the first month, but the conversations were tense and brief. When it became clear that I was not going to back down and apologize, their calls stopped. But what tormented me most was Cody's silence. No calls, no messages, no visits. Through Vivian, who kept in touch with some of her colleagues from the university, I learned that Cody and Verity had returned to work at the Prescott Medical Research Laboratory and that they had bought a house in the prestigious Beaverton neighborhood. "Winnie, you seem pensive today," Vivian said as she came out onto the porch with 2 cups of tea. "Are you in pain again?" "No, today is a good day," I said, gratefully accepting the cup. "I'm just thinner, his face gaunt, but his eyes, the same blue eyes that always reminded me of my own, looked at me with anxiety and hope." "Grandpa," he took a step forward, "can I come in?" I felt my heart tighten. "Of course, Cody. This is always your home, too." Vivian stood up, picking up her cup. "I'll go check on my experiment," she said, looking at me meaningfully. "Cody, you too." "It's unforgivable." "You have nothing to forgive," I replied gently. "You had your own life, your own problems. I understand." "No, you don't." Cody finally looked me in the eye. "I was angry at you for ruining my wedding. I didn't believe you. I thought you just didn't want me to be happy with Verity." I remained silent, giving him a chance to speak. "I convinced myself that you were wrong, that you had misheard or misinterpreted, that the stress of your illness had made you see the world in black and white." He covered his face with his hands for a moment. "I wanted so desperately to believe that, Grandpa." "I know, Cody," I said quietly, "and I don't blame you. The truth is often painful, especially when it destroys what we consider to be our happiness." Cody looked up at me, his eyes full of pain and confusion. "You were everything it makes," his voice faltered. "Verity said she'd take care of it, that I was naive enough to sign anything she asked." I sighed. This turn of events didn't surprise me, but it hurt to see Cody suffer. "I asked her about it directly," he continued. "And you know what's weird? She didn't even deny it. She said I should be more practical, that this is a business and emotions have no place here, that our marriage was a convenient union of 2 scientists with common interests, and that I should grow up and stop being an idealist." "And what did you do?" I asked quietly. "I packed my things and left. Cody ran his hand through his hair. I'm living in a university apartment now. I filed for divorce 3 days ago. The Prescotts are furious. Alfred is threatening to destroy my scientific career. I got up from my chair, walked over to my grandson, and put my hand on his shoulder. I'm sorry you had to go through this, Cody. I really am. If I could take away your pain, I would. He turned and suddenly hugged me tightly. I felt his shoulders shake with suppressed sobs. I was so afraid I wouldn't make it in time, Grandpa. His voice was muffled. I was afraid you would leave before I could tell you how sorry I am, how much I love you. I hugged him back, feeling my own eyes fill with tears. I'm not going anywhere anytime soon, I joked. Dr. Hammond says I'm a stubborn old man who doesn't follow the schedule set by statistics. Cody pulled away, wiping his eyes. I heard. He said the dynamics are good, that you can, he faltered, live longer than originally expected? I finished for him. Yes, that's a possibility, but I try not to make plans too far in advance. Every day now is a gift, and I intend to live it to the fullest. We returned to our chairs. Cody looked calmer, as if a heavy burden had been lifted from his shoulders. What are you going to do now? I asked. With your research, with your work? I don't know, he shrugged. I may have to start from scratch. I recorded all the data, all my observations, but without the resources of Prescott Medical, it would be difficult to continue the current research. Don't forget that you're a Hampter, I smiled slightly, and we're known for our stubbornness and ability to find unconventional solutions. Remember how I conducted that study on the toxicity of deep-sea algae with virtually no budget, using equipment I assembled myself? And you won an international award for it. Cody nodded, his eyes brightening slightly. Yes, you've always been resourceful. Besides, I took the envelope I'd been carrying around for months out of my pocket. You have this. I never got to give it to you at the wedding. Cody took the envelope with a puzzled look. What is it? The documents for the house and the bank account. I transferred everything to you before the wedding. The house and the remaining savings are all yours, Cody. Use it for your research, for a new life, for whatever you want. He stared at the envelope, hesitating to open it. Grandpa, I can't. It's too much. You can and you must, I said firmly. I've always known that you're the only one in this family who truly shares my passion for science, for understanding the world. I want you to continue this journey, Cody, without financial constraints, without having to compromise your principles for money. Cody slowly opened the envelope, looked through the documents, and his eyes widened. Grandpa, this is a huge amount of money. The patent for the method of detecting marine toxins turned out to be quite profitable, I shrugged, and I've never been one to be wasteful. I don't know what to say, Cody looked stunned. Tell me you'll use these resources to continue your research, your own independent research. I looked him in the eyes, and that you will never let anyone manipulate you or force you to go against your principles. Cody nodded, determination appearing in his eyes. I promise, Grandpa, I won't let you down. You've never let me down, I smiled. Even when we weren't talking these past few months, I knew that sooner or later you would see the truth. Because you, like me, are always searching for the truth deep down, even when it's uncomfortable. Vivian appeared on the porch with a tray holding 3 cups of tea and a plate of homemade cookies. I thought you might need some refreshments for your conversation, she said with a smile. Cody, stay for dinner. I made lasagna according to my grandmother's recipe. The secret ingredient is a little white wine in the sauce. I'd love to, Cody smiled at her. Thank you, Dr. Clark. Just Vivian, she winked at him. Dr. Clark makes me want to find my doctor's gown and wig, like in British courts. We laughed, and I felt warmth spreading through my body. Not from the tea, but from this moment, a simple, human moment of connection between people who care about each other. After dinner, Cody helped me out onto the pier. The night was clear, the stars reflecting off the dark surface of the lake, creating the illusion of infinity. We sat in silence, enjoying the peace and beauty of the moment. You know, Grandpa, Cody finally said, I've been thinking a lot lately about what's really important in life, about what makes us happy. And what conclusions have you come to? I asked with interest. That true happiness doesn't come from status, money, or public recognition, he said slowly. It comes from being able to be yourself, doing what you love, and being surrounded by people who accept you for who you are. No strings attached, no expectations, no manipulation. I nodded, feeling proud of my grandson's wisdom. Some people only come to this realization at the end of their lives, Cody. You're lucky to have realized it so early. I had a good teacher, he smiled at me. You had a stubborn grandfather who made a lot of mistakes in his life. I shook my head. But yes, I did get some things right. Like what? For example, that you can't betray yourself for the comfort of others, Warnum, I replied, looking at the stars. That honesty, even when it's painful, is always better than a comforting lie. That science is not just a career, but a way of seeing the world. An approach to life based on curiosity, honesty, and a willingness to admit your mistakes. Cody listened intently, just like when I used to tell him about sea creatures when he was a child. And I also realize, I continued, that love, true love, doesn't require you to become less than you are. It makes you bigger, stronger, better. It liberates, not restricts. We sat on the pier for a long time, talking about science, the future, and the past. Cody told me about his plans to start a small independent research lab, and I shared memories of my expeditions. The night enveloped us in its tranquility, the stars reflected in the lake, creating a sense of infinite space and time. And at that moment, I realized that despite my illness, despite the limited time I had left, I felt more free and whole than I had in many years. Perhaps this was the most important discovery of my life. The realization that the freedom to be yourself, surrounded by those who love you just as you are, is the greatest gift we can give ourselves and each other.